Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by the XO, the Christoph.
The Dale. I like how we're adding "the" in front of our names. It makes us sound important. Or maybe old. I'm not sure. Like the Walmart or the Facebook. The Dale. Maybe I just put "the" in front of everything. Goot.
Well, now I feel bad.
No, don't.
Now I
don't
feel
feel bad. Don't feel bad. This is a renaissance for me. You're helping me claim my own identity.
All right. So, we are getting close to the end. Got one more battle in the southern theater of the Revolutionary War. And then we're going to talk briefly about the Caribbean theater with two battles there. We're going to talk briefly on the Gulf Coast campaign with one battle. So, let's see if we can knock it all out in this last go.
I like a challenge. Let's do it.
All right, so let's get underway.
Let's do it.
All right, so the Battle of Chesapeake. During the early months of 1781, the British and American forces began concentrating in Virginia. This state had actually not experienced anything more than just naval raids. The British forces were led at first by Benedict Arnold, the traitor of traitors. Then William Phillips took over. He did his thing before turning it over to General Charles Earl Cornwallis. He took command in late May. He marched into Williamsburg in June and got a series of orders which confused the heck out of him from General Sir Henry Clinton. That pretty much told him to establish a fortified deep water port so they could be resupplied from the sea. Cornwallis moves to Yorktown in July, and he has his guys start building fortifications.
Makes sense.
Right. So the presence of these guys, and with Clinton's desire for a port, made control of the Chesapeake Bay essential. So the commanders of the American and French armies, George Washington and Comte de Rochambeau, they meet to discuss how they're going to come at the British. They considered either an assault or a siege on the British base in New York City, or operations against the British forces in Virginia. Now, both of these options would require the assistance of the French fleet, which were in the West Indies. So a ship is sent to meet with the French Rear Admiral Francois Joseph Paul Comte de Grasse. Now, Rochambeau, he wrote a private little note. And he said, you know what, guys? I want the operation in Virginia to happen. So he's trying to tip the balance there a little bit behind GW's back.
That it seems like a mistake to go in against Mr. Washington, General Washington, but I mean, I happen to know how this ends, so maybe it isn't a bad thing. We'll see. I want to see how it unfolds, though.
Spoilers!
I didn't say how it's going to end. I mean, either way, we're speaking English, right?
Either way, no matter who won, we would be speaking
That's correct.
English.
See?
I'm watching you.
And you.
So both of the generals moved their forces to White Plains, New York, to study the defenses there at New York and to await the news from de Grasse. So de Grasse, he arrives at Cap Francis on August 15th. And he immediately sent a reply. And his reply was that he would make for Chesapeake. So he embarked 3,200 troops and got underway with a fleet of 28 ships of the line.
Whoa.
Big old fleet.
Yeah.
Now, he plotted a route that was outside of the normal shipping lanes to try to mask his movements.
Smart.
He arrived at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay on August 30th. So it took him 15 days.
That doesn't seem too bad.
No. He disembarked his troops to help with a blockade of Cornwallis. 2 British frigates that were supposed to be on patrol outside the bay ended up trapped inside the bay when the French arrive. So this prevented the British in New York from learning the full strength of the French fleet until it was too late.
That's really well done. Like, the way they went about strategically approaching and disguising their number, discovered it all. In an age of instant communication and radar and satellites, of course that's moot, but, I mean, just the fog of war back then was immense.
Oh,
I guess that's true.
Even today, the fog of war at sea is just... You got all that water that you got to search for one tiny little boat. Even if it is an aircraft carrier, when compared to the sea, it's a tiny little boat.
Well, what happens next?
Well, the British Admiral George Rodney this guy had been tracking de Grasse around the West Indies, and he was alerted when they left, but he did not know where they were going. He thought that de Grasse would return a portion of his fleet to Europe. So Rodney detached 14 ships under Rear Admiral Sir Samuel Hood to find de Grasse's destination in North America.
Oh, poor guy.
So he left for Europe with the rest of his fleet to recover his tum-tum and refit his fleet.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes. So they sailed directly to Chesapeake and beat de Grasse.
Makes sense.
They got there on August 25th, which was 5 days earlier than de Grasse.
Wow.
So they set sail again and go to New York.
That's interesting, because not seeing the French probably supported his theory that some of them went back to Europe, and that his guard was lowered as a result.
So the Admiral's colleague, who was the commander of the New York fleet, Rear Admiral Sir Thomas Graves, he actually had spent several weeks trying to intercept a convoy organized by John Lawrence to bring, supplies that they needed and actually hard currency from France to Boston. And when Hood gets to New York, he finds that Graves was in port, having failed at that mission. And that out of all of his fleet, he only had 5 ships of the line that were ready to go. Now, de Grasse, he had notified the Comte de Barras Saint Laurent in Newport of what he was going to do and when he was going to be there. An estimate, but,
Right.
So Barras sailed from Newport on August 27th with 8 ships of the line, 4 frigates, and 18 transports carrying French armaments and siege equipment. And he sailed a circular route in order to minimize the possibility of a British encounter.
Right.
Now, the Army guys, Washington and Rochambeau, they had crossed the Hudson on August 24th. They did leave some troops behind to try to trick and delay any move that General Clinton might try to do to assist Cornwallis. So once the news of Barras leaving get to the British, they are like, oh crap, they're going for Chesapeake.
Right. Oh, that deep water port that we wanted to get, they're going there.
Yes. And so by August 31st, Graves had moved his 5 ships of the line out of New York Harbor to meet up with Hood's force. He takes command of the combined fleet, which now number 19.
Golly.
And they sail south and arrive at the mouth of the Chesapeake on September 5th. Now, his progress was slowed because of the condition of some of the West Indies ships. They needed repairs en route. And there was also some concern about some of the British New York ships as well.
Oh, okay. I was like, the continent is pretty fixed as far as I know.
Continental drift.
It can go places. I'm glad you clarified. I guess that's my point. Repairing those while you're sailing a ship, the idea of repairing, whether it be a mast or a sail or the hull, that just seems very difficult. And I'm not saying it's not difficult now, but it just seems like we would have more tools, more technology. And then also sailing 19 ships together using the same winds and everything. I guess I'm showing my ignorance of maritime experience, but that seems really difficult.
Well, sailing information is a lot easier than doing repairs while underway. But that also depends on the extent of the repairs needed. I mean, there are some repairs that you would have to actually just stop. Mm-hmm. Let the boats drift while making your repairs. But there's others you can make while underway.
Which repairs? Just thinking about that concept is illuminating.
Yeah, but sailing in a formation, that's easy. You just got semaphore, you can communicate, and you're like,
that's
hey.
True.
They're experienced. They know how far away they need to be from each other and everything like that. It's
okay,
easy.
Cool.
So the French and British patrol frigates, they see each other around 0930. They both, at first, undercounted the size of the other fleet, leading each of the commanders to believe the other fleet was the smaller fleet. When they finally figured out how many boats were each fleet, Graves, he assumed that de Grasse and Barras had already joined forces and prepared for battle. So he directed his line towards the Mouth Bay, trying to get favorable winds from the north-northeast. De Grasse, he had detached a few of his ships to block the York and James River, which was further up the bay, and a lot of his ships were at anchor missing people, officers and men.
Huh.
When they first saw the British. And so this actually made it more difficult for him to organize a line of battle, because he also had to deal with the incoming tide.
Oh, no.
Yeah. The winds and land features would require him to tack opposite of the British fleet. So it would put him at a disadvantage. So at 11:30, 24 ships of the French fleet cut their anchor lines.
Whoa.
But typically, boats would have spare anchors
Okay.
anyway, so that wasn't that big of a deal.
Then that's a big deal.
I mean, if you foul your anchor, you're going to have to cut it loose anyway.
That's a good point.
But they begin sailing out of the bay with the noon tide. Then they leave behind a shore contingent with their longboats. Some of these ships were so undermanned that not all their guns could be manned.
Whoa.
Some of these ships left port missing 200 men.
It's shocking to me that a ship could even hold 200 men at that day and age.
I think the smallest boat in this battle was 64 guns.
That's the smallest.
Two of them had 98 guns.
That's beyond... I can't even imagine a ship with 98 guns.
No, I'm sorry. The biggest one on the French fleet had 110 guns.
Whoa.
It was biggest on the British side was 98.
That's a lot of guns.
Yeah. So, de Grasse orders the ships to form a line as they left the bay in order of how good a speed they can get. So the fastest boats get out first,
Okay.
you know. So the Auguste, commanded by Admiral Louis de Bougainville, was one of the first ships out. With a squadron of 3 other ships, they ended up well ahead of the rest of the French line. And so by 1545, the gap was large enough that the British could have cut his squadron off from the rest of the fleet.
I have a question for you. There's a lot of details going on as far as the movements and the manpower and all this stuff, and I know most of that would probably come from the logs that the officers kept, or the captain specifically. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
What is the deal with, you're in a battle, right? You're sending orders to your sailors to man stations or cut a certain way. When do you have time to record this stuff?
Oh, there's somebody doing that for him.
Okay.
For the captain. No, yeah, he's not doing it himself most of the time. Most of the time, if he's entering it into the log himself, that's during normal voyages. Some of these entries are like, today, this is how the weather was, this is the speed we were traveling,
Okay.
Nothing else happened.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds silly now that I think about it. Of course there was somebody else writing that down. This is important. I'm giving these orders.
Yeah, I mean, well, everybody's at their general quarter stations. Well, somebody's general quarter station is that log.
Okay. That makes sense. Thanks.
To back it up a little bit, by 1300, the two fleets were roughly facing each other, but sailing on opposite tacks. So in order to engage each other and to avoid some shoals near the mouth of the bay, Graves at 1400 ordered his whole fleet to wear. This is a maneuver that reversed his line of battle and enable it to line up with the French fleet as it left the bay. So this placed the Hood with his most aggressive commander at the rear of the line and placed Admiral Francis Samuel Drake in the vanguard.
The Sir Francis Drake?
Yes.
Wow. That guy's a legend.
So at this point, both fleets were sailing generally west, away from the bay, with winds from the north-northeast. And they were both approaching at an angle so that the leading ships of the vanguards of both lines were within range of each other,
Okay.
while the ships at the rear were too far apart to engage. Now, the French did have a firing advantage, because the wind conditions meant that they could open their lower gun ports. The lower gun ports were not under the water line.
Right, okay. I was trying to figure out what you meant, but yes, because they had multiple rows of guns, and the lowest ones would sometimes be under the water line, but now these wouldn't
Right.
be.
But the winds are hitting at an angle enough that the ship was listing to, whether it was the port or starboard, to be able to have those lower gun ports above water.
Cool.
And of course, the British did not have that advantage. And if they would have opened their lower gun ports, water would get in.
They would have flooded. That would be funny.
Yeah. The French fleet was also in a better state of repair than the British fleet. And of course, they outnumbered the British in the number of ships and the total and the total number of guns. They also had heavier guns.
So heavier guns meaning they can shoot farther?
They could shoot heavier cannonballs.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Well, yeah, that's a decisive advantage.
Yeah. The French had 1,542 guns in total versus the British 1,410.
Well, it's close, but that's this is going to be quite a battle.
Well, that's 1,542 guns shooting at 19 ships versus 1,410 guns shooting at 24 ships. You can concentrate more firepower on one ship with more guns.
Yes, I understand the gun density formula that you're trying to communicate. Oh my gosh, that must have been so loud. You know?
Oh, immensely. I don't even know how these guys, after their first cannon discharge, could hear anything for the rest of their lives.
Because they're there.
And I don't think they really used much in the way of hearing protection.
OSHA would come much later.
Yes. I mean, I think the best they could do is just stuff cotton in their ears.
That's what I was thinking.
Which I think they did.
I
maybe
hope so.
Maybe sealed them with earwax or with
candle
with
wax?
beeswax,
Beeswax.
but I'm not sure 100% on that. But I think that's what they try to do.
Maybe that can be your homework assignment, Captain.
I don't do homework. You do.
I was trying to get out ahead of it, so I figured if I assigned it to you, I wouldn't have to do it. But yeah, that sounds fair.
Yeah. So Graves at this point did not press the advantage of the separated French vanguard, as the French center and the rear were had closed the distance with the British line first. One of the British observers wrote, "To the astonishment of the whole fleet, the French center were permitted without molestation to bear down to support their van."
So van meaning vanguard?
Mm-hmm.
And center meaning what exactly?
The center.
Of the fleet?
Yeah. They're in lines, remember?
Yes, but I'm not. I guess I don't know the terminology. So a vanguard is what position exactly?
Vanguard is typically in the forward, is in the forward position. But in this battle, since they reversed everything,
Right.
now the vanguard is in the rear.
Okay, and the center would just be the middle of the line.
The center would still be the
Okay.
center.
I think I'm following now.
Okay. So they needed for the two lines to actually reach parallel lines to fully engage. This led Graves to give conflicting signals that were interpreted critically differently by Admiral Hood. So none of the options for closing the angles between the lines presented a favorable option to the British commander. And any maneuvers to bring ships closer would limit their firing ability to their bow guns, and potentially expose their decks to raking or enfelding fire from the enemy. And enfelding fire is fire that is directed along the longest axis of the ship.
I see. I'm glad you properly read the confused look on my face and anticipated the question I was going to ask. But, I tried to keep it together as if I knew. But, for the benefit of the listener, that was good.
Mm-hmm. So Grave hoists 2 signal flags. One for line ahead, which means that the ships would slowly close the gap and then straighten the line when parallel to the enemy. And one for close action, which normally indicates that the ships should turn to directly approach the enemy line, turning when the appropriate distance was reached. So the combination of these signals resulted in the piecemeal arrival of his ships into the range of battle.
That's awful, because then there's just the singular target that all the ships can fire at, one by one.
Yeah.
Oof.
Admiral Hood interpreted the instruction to maintain line of battle to take precedence over the signal for close action. And because of this, his squadron did not close rapidly and never significantly was able to engage in the battle. So, 1600 rolls around. This was 6 hours after they sight each other. The British, they did win the weather gauge, and they were able to open the attack because they had the initiative. They rolled higher than the other one.
Right.
So the battle begins with the HMS Intrepid opening fire against the Marsalis, which is the other boat that is at the head of the line. And the battle very quickly became just a general slugfest, with the van and center of each line just fully firing it out.
Wow.
The French, which did what they were known for, and they tended to aim at the British masts and rigging, with the intent of crippling them. The effects of this tactic were apparent in this battle as well. The Shrewsbury and the HMS Intrepid at the head of the British line were pretty much DIW, dead in the water, and fell out of the line. The rest of Admiral Drake's squadron did suffer heavy damage as well, but the casualties were not as severe as those taken on the first 2 ships. The angle of the approach of the British line played a large role in the damage that they sustained, and the ships in their van were exposed to raking fire because their bow guns were the only guns able to be brought to bear on the French. Now, the French van also took a beating, though it was less severe. The Captain D. Bodes of the Refici was killed in the opening broadside of Admiral Drake's Princessa. And the 4 ships of the French van were, according to a French observer, quote, engaged with 7 or 8 vessels at, quote, close quarters.
Whoa.
The Diadème was, quote, utterly unable to keep up the battle, having only 4 36-pounders and 9 18-pounders fit for use. And, she was badly shot up. She was rescued by the intervention of the Saint Esprit. The Princessa and the Bougainville's Auguste at one point were close enough that the French admiral considered boarding.
Wow.
Yeah. This was on the Drake. but she managed to pull away. This gave Bougainville the chance to target the Terrible. And her foremast was already in very bad shape before the battle even started. And it was struck by several French shot, and her pumps, which were already overtaxed just to try to keep her afloat, were badly damaged by these shots.
I have a question about what you said regarding the French strategy of crippling ships. And is that, and I understand maybe some of the reasons behind that, but were the British not, did they not adopt that philosophy? Like, were they just kind of just destroy the ship in the water, or do you know how that was contrasted?
The British were more, let's shoot and clear the crew.
I see.
While the French were, let's kill their maneuverability and we can just pick them off as we please.
Right. I see. Interesting. That's okay. That answers my question. I find it very curious why different cultures approach things differently. And yeah, that's interesting.
So that brings us to about 1700. This is when the wind begins to shift against the British. De Grasse, he gives a signal for the van to move further ahead so that more of the French fleet could engage. But Bougainville, he was actually fully engaged with the British van at musket range. And so he did not want to risk severe handling had the French presented the stern. But when he did finally begin pulling away, the British interpreted this as a retreat.
Oh.
But rather than follow them and pursue them, they hung back, continuing to fire at long range. A French officer later wrote that the British, quote, only engaged from far off and simply in order to be able to say that they fought back. Sunset arrives, and this brings an end to the battle, with both fleets continuing on a southeast tack away from the bay. The center of the both lines were still engaged, but the level of damage and casualties suffered was noticeably less. The ships in the rear squadrons were mostly uninvolved. Admiral Hood reported that 3 of his ships fired a few shots. They were able to get 1 or 2 shots off.
Well, yeah. How does one fight at night? Or do they?
Not really. You can't really see much.
Right.
So unless it's
like a full moon?
Bright full moon night, you're really not going to be able to do much. It's all you have to go on for aiming is the flash of muzzles. Mm-hmm. So if somebody stops firing, you lose sight of them.
Makes sense. That has to be nerve-wracking. You know what I mean? Because the enemy's right there.
We know they're there. We know they're there, but we can't see them.
Right, and we can't do anything about it.
So that evening, Graves did a damage assessment, and he noted that the French had not the appearance of, quote, near so much damage as we had sustained. That 5 of his fleet were either leaking or virtually crippled. But he maintained a windward position throughout the night, so that he would have the choice of battle in the morning. So he can be like, I'm going to engage, or I'm not going to engage.
That's wise.
Yeah. So, of course, through the night, repairs are being made, and Graves made the decision that he would not be able to attack the next day. And on the night of September 6th, he held council with Hood and Drake. And during this meeting, Hood and Graves supposedly exchanged words about the conflicting signals.
Right.
And Hood was like, you know what, guys, we just need to turn the fleet around and go back to Chesapeake. Graves was like, no. So they continued to drift eastward away from Cornwallis. On September 8th and 9th, the French fleet were able to gain the wind advantage and briefly threatened the British with a renewed battle. But, nah. The French scouts, they found the British fleet on September 9th, and de Grasse then turned his fleet back towards Chesapeake Bay. They got back on September 12th and found that the British had arrived 2 days earlier.
Oh.
Graves ordered that the Terrible to be scuttled on September 11th due to how many holes she had in her, and was notified on September 13th that the French fleet was back in Chesapeake. He did not know that de Grasse's line had not included the Barras's fleet, because the frigate captain making the report had not counted the ship.
Oh.
So, in a war council that day, the British admirals decided not to attack the French due to the, quote, truly lamentable state we have brought ourselves.
Yeah, the kings of understatement.
Graves then turned his fleet to New York, arriving off Sandy Hook on September 20th. When the British got to New York, it set off a flurry of panic against the Loyalists. And the news of the defeat was not received very well in London. King George III wrote that, quote, after the knowledge of the defeat of our fleet, I nearly think the empire ruined.
Whoa. That was the turning point. You're
Yeah.
welcome, other colonies.
The French stayed firmly in control of Chesapeake Bay. This completed the encirclement of Cornwallis. They also captured a number of smaller British boats, and de Grasse and Barrios assigned their smaller vessels to assist in the transport of Washington's and Rochambeau's forces from Head of Elk to Yorktown. It was not until September 23rd that Graves and Clinton learned that the French fleet in the Chesapeake numbered 36. This came from a dispatch from Cornwallis that was smuggled out on September 17th, where he asked for help. Quote, if you cannot relieve me very soon, you must be prepared to hear the worst. So Admiral Graves made repairs in New York and set sail on October 19th with 25 ships of the line and transports carrying 7,000 troops to relieve Cornwallis.
Wow.
This happened 2 days after Cornwallis surrendered.
Well, he didn't really have a choice.
Yeah. Let's see. So that was the Battle of Chesapeake.
All right. Way to go, French military Navy. Thank you so much on behalf of the United States.
So, how are you feeling after that battle?
Pretty good. That was it was interesting to hear the strategies, to hear the outcomes, to note the differences, and this was everything that I love about this podcast. Just kind of getting into the nitty-gritty and the details of the conflict and what happened and what the outcome is and what the ramifications are. It was great.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, we have the Caribbean theater, 2 battles, and the Gulf Coast with 1 battle. I think we're going to make it one more episode because we're at, getting towards the end here.
Yeah, I think it's important that we give each venue, each conflict, the right amount of discussion and time, and we owe that to the listener. I mean, they would want nothing less, and so we're at your behest, listeners.
Mm-hmm. So, at the end of each episode, we like to honor one of our fallen angels with the help of HeroCards.us. And today, we are honoring Petty Officer Second Class Robert Dean Stetham. His hometown was Waldorf, Maryland. He was part of the Underwater Construction Team 1 in Norfolk, Virginia. He received a Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and Prisoner of War medal. His date of sacrifice was June 15th, 1985 in Beirut, Lebanon. He was 23. So, Robbie Stetham was born into a proud Navy family on November 17th, 1961 in Waterbury, Connecticut. His father, Richard, served for 26 years and retired as Senior Chief Petty Officer.
Wow.
After retiring, he continued to work for the Navy as a civilian for another 20 years. Robert's mother, Patricia, served in the Navy before leaving active duty to raise the family. His brother, Kenneth, served for 20 years and retired as a Navy SEAL.
Dang.
Another brother, Patrick, like Robert, was a CB diver and served for 10 years in the same Underwater Construction Team 1. When the children were young, the Stetham family moved to Virginia Beach, Virginia, and later to Waldorf, Maryland, where Robert attended Thomas Stone High School and played defensive back for the Cougars football team, and graduated in 1980. On May 4th, 1981, at the age of 19, Robert entered the United States Navy and was assigned to the Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 62 in Gulfport, Mississippi, for training as a CB steelworker. CB is a nickname given to construction battalions based on their initials, CB. According to his family, Robert was excited about the opportunities to travel with the Navy. His time with NMCB 62 took him on multiple tours of the island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, and to the island of Guam in the Pacific. Robert Stetham received more training to become a second-class Navy diver, assigned to Underwater Construction Team 1 based out of Norfolk, Virginia. This assignment took him to Nia Makari, just east of Athens, Greece. In June 1985, Robert Stetham was returning from Nia Makari with 5 teammates on a civilian airliner, Trans World Airlines Flight 847. After taking off from Athens, the flight was hijacked by Shiite Muslim extremists aligned with Hezbollah, an Iran-funded Lebanese terrorist organization. The hijackers forced the flight to make multiple landings in Algeria, and in Beirut, Lebanon. They held 39 people hostage for 17 days, demanding the release of Lebanese and Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. Demanding to know which of the passengers were Jews, the hijackers gathered passports, looking for Jewish-sounding names. With the passports, the terrorists identified the 6 Navy teammates as American military and singled out Stetham for brutal beatings, threatening to kill all passengers unless their demands were met. One of the terrorists proved their point by shooting Robert Stetham in the head and dumping his body out onto the Beirut airplane tarmac. He was 23 years old. For his courage in not succumbing to the brutality of his captors, Robert Dean Stetham was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star on March 12, 1986. His citation reads, "For heroic achievement on 14 June 1985, while assigned to Detachment November Mike 85 of Underwater Construction Team 1, deployed to the Naval Communication Station Nia Marki, Greece. Petty Officer Stetham displayed exceptional valor and professional integrity while a hostage of militant Shiite hijackers of Trans World Airlines Flight 847 at Athens International Airport, Algiers, Algeria, and at Beirut, Lebanon, exhibiting physical, mental, and emotional courage beyond extraordinary limits. Petty Officer Stetham endured a senseless and brutal beating at the hands of his fanatical captors. He drew upon an unwavering inner strength and absorbed the punishment. The hijackers, infuriated by his refusal to succumb, a symbol to them of the strength of the United States of America, and their cowardly desperation, shot him to death. Petty Officer Stethem's courage, steadfast determination, and loyal devotion to duty reflected great credit upon himself, and were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Navy. Petty Officer Robert Dean Stetham is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 59. Among numerous tributes memorializing Robert Stetham, in 1995, the Navy destroyer USS Stetham, DDG-63, was named in his honor. A vocational school in Pomfret, Maryland, is named the Robert D. Stetham Educational Center. In 2010, Stetham received an honorary promotion to Constructionman Master Chief Petty Officer from the U.S. Navy. So, Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Dean Stetham, we thank you.
Thank you.
Christoph, take us out.
All right. Well, once again, listener, thank you so much for choosing to spend time with us. Hopefully we were able to teach you a little something about our history. And if you like what you hear, please rate us. iTunes, YouTube, there's a couple of different places to rate us. But please, as you do, podcasts reach farther out. If you want to get a hold of us, there's a couple of different ways to do that. You can email us at usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. We're on X, formerly Twitter. Our handle is at US Navy History Pod. USN? I always mess that up. I should really look that up, and then I can be for sure. But this brings me to my next point. All of this information is in the show notes, so you can go to the show notes and find out that I'm either 100% correct or I have no idea what I'm talking about, and you should rely on the show notes instead of the XO. That's why I'm not Captain Number 1. So anyway, you can do that. We also have a Discord server. You can chat with fellow listeners and us, and we would really love to hear from you. And also we have a brand new subscription thing that you can join, and you can get extra content. So please consider supporting us if you like what you...
And with that, we're going to everybody fair winds following seas.
Care.
Bye-bye.